The first 8 minutes of this video was part of a Big 3 shonen anime analysis compilation I did at the very beginning of 2022. If you want to see that full video, click the link in the description down below. I decided to finish the One Piece section of that video to make a complete essay out of it. Keep in mind, these beginning sections were made before the Luffy's True Dream chapter, but everything I said surprisingly still stands. I was right. No surprise there. From the very conception of his journey, Luffy was driven by something far greater than personal gain. One Piece, that great treasure lying at the climax of his path, it alone would never suffice. The unheard words he utters to his brothers, and a lamentation he exudes to one when the other was gone. Both of these scenes take place on that same ridge. Both are surely similar in that they speak of the immaterial. Did Luffy simply say he wanted to become king of the pirates? I've put my money on no. Because while the goal is the One Piece, the material possession that will grant rights to the king of the pirates, it would mean little if it led to merely dominance. This story has never been about the One Piece, but the avenue that the treasure opens. Whoever holds the key will surely acquire the power to usurp the throne and control, and morph the world stage in whatever way they see fit. The world government fears this phenomenon more than anything else. Their perfect world destroyed and replaced by someone else's canvas. But ironically, their demise won't be at the hands of a superior dominator, but by the inspiration exuding from a man who refuses to even sit at the top. The origin of this eventual great usurper was in a land plagued by the current system's wretchedness. Neither Ace nor Luffy could stop the world from taking away their other brother. Sabo, in all his powerlessness, made a concession. Since he couldn't be saved, he decided to save himself. An imperfect start and an abrupt end to his pirate adventure. Both scenarios the result of circumstances brought upon by this world's ruler, a common phenomenon that was cemented in the mind of our kid protagonist. If one wants to liberate the ones they love, if one wants to be free, truly free, then they must acquire the strength to break the subjugating chains from heaven. A half-dead man at the mercy of a farcical execution, a benevolent liar outpaced by a malevolent deceiver, a trapped cook locked in a cage he put himself in, and an outwardly whimsical girl with inward distress. Luffy begins his journey, saving them all with one sole method. No pondering, no adaptation, no compromise. The climax of his dawn brings him to his most complex problem yet, a village plagued by dominance and corruption. When one of the villagers decides to take matters into her own hands, she is crushed by the weight of the world. But Luffy lightens her load, not with his words, not with a comforting embrace, but with his actions. He doesn't care to hear her story, doesn't care about this place's history. He only wants to lift a fallen friend. But in acting for such a simple reason, in resolving the conflict with a sheer disregard for the complexities layering it, Luffy frees his friend. Nami couldn't quell even a fraction of this world's darkness alone, and Luffy can't even leave the East Blue without his navigator. But at the end of this conflict, our hero's brash decisions allow Nami the freedom to dictate Luffy's fate. But there's another factor in all of this. It's the reason Nami ultimately chooses to help Luffy and leave her recovering home. It's not just what Luffy did, it's also the thought behind those blows. A thought constantly sparking something in the minds of his observers. A great swell behind a goofy demeanor. A constitution that no one will ever silence his freedom, nor the freedom of those around him. If he can't stop the subjugation alone, his insane adherence to his pirate way will inspire the surrounding masses into picking up the slack. Because after all, deep down, everyone wants to be free. This phenomenon happened on this tiny island, and it would happen time and time again after this on a progressively larger scale. Nami is rescued not only thanks to Luffy's actions, but his dedication to his simple way of life. This methodology would be challenged, though. With their ship on the brink, Usopp's departure, and Robin's betrayal, the Straw Hats don't know what to do. The world government's grasp only amounts to 1/3 of their recent struggles, but it is the straw that broke the camel's back for this not-so-motley crew. Their passion is siphoned, and with it, their trust in Robin wanes. 3 members down, and no sign of the coming storm letting up. Luffy takes it the hardest. For a man so notoriously gleeful that his bright smile is even documented in his wanted poster, to go for so long without our hero even cracking a smirk is almost eerie. Moving forth without the Mary, the battle with Usopp, and the decision to make Robin either a friend or foe. It's all Luffy's call as captain. At no time before this was his status ever tested as much as it is now. No matter what happens, no matter the weight he carries. If he succumbs even for a moment, the unit he's amassed will fall apart. They rely on him to be the beacon of hope in all this mess, but at the same time, Luffy is relying on Robin. Everyone has their limits. If Robin were to confess that everything was a lie on her end, how would Luffy react? It's safe to assume he wouldn't be able to take it at this point. Luffy places his last remaining leg firmly on the ground and sprints for the truth. But the truth has horrors irrelevant from the Straw Hat's turmoil. And when Robin flees again without a definitive response, Luffy is defeated. The storm nears its climax. Luffy is going to drown. But just before all light seems snuffed out, he hears a message from the last comrade he rescued in a dire situation. Where Luffy once gave Nami hope with a simple remark, Nami returns the favor with an elaborative wail. If Robin was never a traitor, then the rest doesn't matter. World government? Poneglyphs? Void Century? Who cares? All that matters is he can finally act. Right in sync with the greatest swell of Aqua Lagana, Luffy raises a storm of his own, one directed toward Enies Lobby. When the complexities plaguing them are swept away by the captain's resolve, the crew synchronizes with his mentality. It's not just Luffy standing in defiance against the world, wanting to get stronger so as to match this overwhelming force, but his friends as well. A few diverse bodies, but sharing one mind. Standing opposite of them are a unified group in uniform only, their leader wavering constantly, and the most competent among them unable to trust him. The Straw Hats, once hopelessly outmatched when faced with a sliver of this world's secret darkness, transcend themselves to surpass CP9's power. These power-ups not granted to them through extended training, but a newfound clarity of mind. Water 7 was the first time the Straw Hats had suffered so many consecutive defeats, and this was because their minds were muddled with a gaping rift in their crew. Now, they have persevered past that with their resolve screaming out in unison. Will is even more important than prowess in battle. This reinforced will manifests as upgrades for our main characters, and trailing behind them is an unlikely alliance. People that were all once foes a day before this are working together to help rescue Robin, not because it's equally beneficial for most of them, but because they are all equally inspired, not just by Luffy's light anymore, but by the projected light of the entire crew. If freedom is being robbed in front of them, then they will break the subjugating chains from heaven together. This notion only being strengthened by the final act of the arc. It isn't Luffy's words that come before the final blows, but Usopp's, a man whose mind was the most muddled out of them all during their greatest turmoil. But here, growing past and moving past it all with the helpful guidance of another light's words, rekindles Luffy's light, giving him one last spark to ignite the embers of victory. And, even before this, it was the very woman they had come to rescue that shouted the most important words that fueled their transcendence. The beauty of Enies Lobby is not only the successful rescue of Robin, but how despite their vastly different ambitions, they all together completely converge on Luffy's path of freedom. The world is not so easy to navigate, though. The friends who once followed him into a beast's belly are confronted with a different kind of monster, a fraction of hell people call subjugation. A meager force compared to what Luffy would try to combat soon after this. But he crumbles to its weight nonetheless. It was his decision as captain that got the Straw Hats into this mess, and it's his weakness as captain that disallows him from matching up to the consequences of that action. All he can do is run and plead. Exactly like the common folk under a rule that exploits their lack of strength. Here, Luffy tastes a piece of what regular citizens are faced with on the daily. They can't expel a voice loud enough for the world's summit to hear their words, and they can't conjure strength great enough to climb that mountain to relay a different kind of message, the dread of involuntary submission, a kind of suffering the captain of the Straw Hats writhes in on this transitionary island. His friends are plucked away from his grasp, robbing him of the thing that empowers him most. And when he has an opportunity to redeem that loss with his brother, this relationship too falls at the hands of the great power over everyone. But since a much larger chunk has come to greet Luffy in the chaos of war, what he loses here is permanent. A man too weak to call himself captain, and a little brother still too young to save another sibling from the current system. Ace and Luffy could do nothing for Sabo then, and Luffy can't do anything for Ace now. Nothing's changed. Because Luffy knows nothing about the enemy lurking even further beyond his reach than the beasts here, and he breaks down from his own naivety. In order to protect the things he treasures, to fulfill his goal, In order to reach the dream further beyond that still, Luffy must learn about the biggest blockade impeding his course. He must discern the darkness on the horizon to shine his ray of freedom over the globe. His first hint comes off the back of his 2-year training. With a history of discrimination as old as the Void Century, and a place that has darkened by the shadows of a gleaming world above, Luffy hears the first echoes of timeless voices, whispers of the past. Yet, despite their attempt at resonating with his future Liberator, he persists to keep his ears closed. After all, Luffy has a habit of not listening to backstories, where before it didn't hinder his prerogative because he knew who his friends were in the now. Places are different than people. They host a wide variety of personalities, in the present and in the past. To resolve a conflict bigger than on an individual level, Luffy must know the island like he knows his friends, and the only way to truly know a place is to learn its history. He didn't bother to listen to Jinbei's story that had historical relevance plastered all over it, so he can't possibly understand the gravity of his reckless actions now. The thing he's destroying to protect everyone below is actually supposed to be the very vessel that will save everyone by taking them above. A remnant of a past promise, and words still jumbled by the ears of a man who will fulfill it. He doesn't understand why the great Sea Guardians are so insistent on intervening, and doesn't understand what Shirahoshi is truly trying to protect. But soon after this victory, he would begin to learn, and his first step in the right direction comes in the form of a declaration. He hoists his flag over an island that has been shrouded by the great oppressor above since its creation, and displays the first rays of a sun they haven't seen in 800 long years. A small shadow emerges, and its thread of control parallels the largest shadow above everything. Now, the test before the fateful day Luffy takes on the world comes. Don Quixote do Flamingo, a former god replicating that grand throne in the lower world. He has a vibrant and bustling domain on the surface, but below nests the reality of this affluence, just like the Holy Land he can no longer reach. He isn't just a warlord, just Dressrosa's king, just a top underworld broker. He's a discount imitation of Emu. A pirate who wants to fake his way up to the real thing by destroying the clouds the true ruler sits atop. And the man who halts Doflamingo's ascent is the same Liberator who will one day be the one to truly shatter that foundation at the summit. Luffy does not crush this demonic oppressor after solely hearing the cries of his comrades, but the combined pleas of Dressrosa's inhabitants as well. Here, the people that make up a miniature version of the world at large all unanimously bet on Luffy to break their shackles, not just leaving everything up to him, but actively participating in his victory after he spurred the light of hope in them. A true leader, a true captain, is one who inspires feelings even in strangers, even in former adversaries. On this island blanketed in darkness, Luffy achieves the first step of substantial growth toward becoming the embodiment of what he desires. By defeating an imitation, Luffy acquires backing that will fight with him to eradicate the real thing later on. Everything in this one arc points to a future still unseen. Every event holds relevance to the final conflict that will unlock Luffy's true dream. A war approaches, one led by another substantial oppressor. The people he subjugates, Luffy witnesses firsthand. He hears their story as he struggles with them, and in the process, hears a story tied to Wano's history, the tale of Kozuki Oden, of the samurai. A long narrative that resonates with those faint voices Luffy couldn't decipher before. But now, after keeping his ears open and his mind set on one path, Luffy awakens their dormant will. He's put in chains after challenging the King of Beasts, a common fate for those honor-bound swordsmen 20 years ago. But, just like them, this doesn't halt his storm. If anything, it only aids this piercing gale, one grand enough to lead many more warriors who didn't know him long before this. In the last war Luffy participated in, led by another major figure, he crumbled against the world's gravity, and it was only because he wanted to save one brother. Now, to save an entire country, Luffy acts as the major figure leading a coalition of forces toward a new dawn. Rays of light that same brother once tried to bring to this country too. But Ace is dead. And that substantial failure forced Luffy to grow more than he ever would if it didn't happen, because it showed him exactly how blind to his true enemy he was. Post-time skip has slowly but surely granted Luffy clarity. And now, the thing most apparent of all is the accumulative failures of the Alliance resting on his shoulders. Odin couldn't help Roger fulfill the One Piece's greater cause. He couldn't help his retainers grant Wano liberation. And those same retainers couldn't protect their lord. All of these people met drastic failures before this incoming success. At Marineford, even when the Song of Failure wailed a miserable tune, Whitebeard continued forth ahead of everyone else to forge a path toward a successful future. And one of the landmarks he preserved through this action was none other than Luffy. Whitebeard demonstrated why he led the world's opposition in the previous age. Now it's time for Luffy to prove his worth as the new head of the current generation, by winning a war on a bigger scale. For it's not just waged to save one person, but an entire civilization. During Marineford, Luffy's fists never approached the one above the opposing force. Imu has always been veiled in shadow, after all. But here, the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates declares his progression by starting this battle with a direct blow to the leader. Luffy may fall to Kaido again and again after this, but unlike in that previous war where he eventually became flattened, he bounces back until he displays transcendence beyond reason, a form that embodies Luffy's true dream: absolute freedom. For a man who shut his eyes to the possibility of manifesting radiance brilliant enough to eclipse the world government's black hole, this form of white light that pierces his eyelids is far too blinding to ever bring down permanently. It won't waver. It can't waver, because the past symphony has finally reached this laughing buffoon of an emperor, and now it harmonizes with his body, a peak awakened after Luffy refused his constitution to be silenced again and again, just like the resistance of the D's that persisted for 800 years. They fought for freedom then, and they fight for freedom now. Luffy is no different. So, with the weight of all these failures reaching as far back as the Void Century, Luffy unleashes an unparalleled blow, one that uncoils the strongest dragon's grip on Wano. He may still beat down his foes for something as simple as their food supply, but the difference between now and then is he understands the solution is far more complex than the problem. There are many more countries at war with oppressors, and the only way to aid them is to knock down the subjugator above everything. The Pirate King versus the King of the World is sure to be the greatest showdown in fiction. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed what I had to say. Click that bell so you don't miss an upload from me. Support me on Patreon for exclusive benefits. A revamp is coming soon. Thank you so much to my top supporters on Patreon: Sensei Krolon, Dre, and Yo-Yo Man. Well, that's all folks. Spice Boy, out.